Hey guys, tonight we're climbing into a scratchy woolen blanket in 1750s Massachusetts, where the church bell has just rung 6 times and everyone, literally everyone, is preparing for bed because the sun is setting and candles cost more than your weekly bread allowance. You're about to discover sleep habits so bizarre that you probably won't survive a single night without checking your phone for the time, except phones don't exist, and neither does your concept of bedtime. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing all the different time zones tuning in for these bedtime stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the main room of a colonial home as darkness creeps across the floorboards like spilled molasses. The fire in the hearth casts dancing shadows on the walls, and you watch as the entire household begins their nightly transformation. Father snuffs out the precious beeswax candle. That's 2 days' wages right there, while Mother covers the coals with a brass curfew bell, literally covering the fire to prevent the house from burning down overnight. The children scramble up the ladder to the loft, their bare feet slapping against worn wood, while you notice something peculiar. Everyone's moving with practiced efficiency, like actors in a well-rehearsed play. That's because colonial bedtime isn't a suggestion or a personal choice. It's a community event dictated by the sun's schedule and enforced by social pressure that would make your HOA look libertarian. You follow the family's movements, noticing how they prepare for bed with the same ritualistic precision they bring to Sunday prayers. The youngest child recites her evening devotions while standing on the cold floor, her voice mixing with the settling sounds of the house. Father checks the door latch 3 times, not from OCD, but because night brings dangers you can't imagine in your dead-bolted, alarm-systemed world. Here's what's really messing with your modern brain. These people are going to bed at what you'd consider dinner time. During winter months, that means 5:30 p.m. But before you judge them as boring, remember they're not planning to sleep straight through until morning. Oh no, they have something much stranger in mind. The concept of bedtime in colonial America was less about personal preference and more about survival economics. Every minute of candlelight meant money literally burning away. Historians still argue whether the average family could afford more than an hour of artificial light per night, with some estimates suggesting that a single candle could cost the equivalent of $25 in today's money. You watch as Mother performs the final household checks, moving through tasks that seem almost superstitious to your eyes. She turns the chairs upside down on the table, not for cleaning, but because folklore says it prevents evil spirits from sitting in them overnight. She places a broom across the doorway and sprinkles salt on the windowsills. These aren't quaint traditions. They're serious protective measures against forces that colonists believed roamed freely once darkness fell. The temperature is dropping fast now. Without central heating, the house becomes an icebox within an hour of sunset. You see family members grabbing extra layers, not the cozy pajamas you're imagining, but day clothes they'll sleep in because specialized nightwear is a luxury most can't afford. The children wrap themselves in scratchy homespun blankets that smell of wood smoke and tallow. The grandfather clock in the corner, if this family is wealthy enough to own one, strikes 8 o'clock, and you're already tucked into bed with the rest of the household. But here's where things get seriously weird. Nobody's planning to sleep through until morning. You're about to experience something called first sleep, and it's going to completely scramble your understanding of what a night's rest means. You settle into the rope bed, feeling the cords sag under your weight, and close your eyes. The house creaks and settles around you, punctuated by the occasional snore from the children's loft above. After about 3 hours of surprisingly deep sleep, something bizarre happens. You wake up, not because you need the bathroom or heard a noise, but because your body is programmed to do exactly this. It's midnight, and you're wide awake, alert, and ready for, well, that's the strange part. Everyone else is stirring too. This isn't insomnia or a sleep disorder. This is the watch or watching hour, a period of wakeful activity that colonial Americans considered as natural as breathing. You hear rustling from the other bed as your host family begins their midnight routines. Someone lights a candle, just one, shared between everyone, and the room fills with a dim, flickering glow that makes shadows dance on the walls like restless spirits. The historical record on this two-sleep pattern is so extensive that scholars like Roger Akirk have documented over 500 references to it in diaries, court records, and literature. The phrase first sleep appears in documents as casually as we might mention lunch break. One Virginia colonist wrote in 1710 about waking from his first sleep to find his house on fire, and his primary concern in the diary entry was that it interrupted his prayers, not that he'd woken up at all. You watch as different family members engage in various middle-of-the-night activities. Father pulls out his Bible, squinting in the candlelight to read a few verses. Mother might be mending by touch more than sight, her fingers working familiar patterns in the near darkness. Some couples, and here's where colonial life gets spicy, used this wakeful period for intimate relations, believing that the rest beforehand made men more virile and women more likely to conceive. The really mind-bending part? This wasn't considered weird or problematic. Doctors actually recommended specific activities for the watching hour. The famous physician Thomas Cogan advised that during this time, students should review their lessons because the mind was more fit for study after first sleep. Others suggested it was the perfect time for contemplation, prayer, or even visiting neighbors. Yes, people actually made social calls at 1 a.m. You hear footsteps on the stairs and realize the eldest daughter is heading outside to check on the animals. This is completely normal. The watch was prime time for tending fires, feeding livestock, or even doing light chores. In larger towns, you might encounter fellow midnight wanderers on the streets, perhaps heading to the tavern that stays open specifically for the watching hour crowd. It's like a secret second day that your modern world has completely forgotten existed. But here's the fringe historical tidbit that'll really bake your noodle. Some historians believe this segmented sleep pattern wasn't just cultural, it was biological. Studies on people isolated from artificial light show they naturally fall into this two sleep pattern within weeks. Your colonial hosts aren't fighting their circadian rhythms like you do with your 2 a.m. Netflix binges. They're actually following them. The watching hour is also prime time for supernatural experiences, at least according to colonial beliefs. This is when you're most likely to receive prophetic dreams, encounter spirits, or, if you're unlucky, fall victim to witchcraft. The fact that everyone is simultaneously awake and in an altered state of consciousness creates a collective liminal space that colonists filled with meaning, mystery, and sometimes terror. As the candle burns lower, you notice people beginning to settle back into bed. The transition to second sleep or morning sleep is as natural as the first awakening. You pull the scratchy blanket back up to your chin, listening to the house return to silence. But now you're hyper aware that in another 3 or 4 hours, this whole process will complete itself, and you'll wake to face a colonial morning, which starts at 4 a.m. sharp. Darkness be damned. You drift back into second sleep, but your rest is interrupted by something poking into your ribs, rolling over. You discover it's not just the rope bed sagging in weird places. It's the actual architecture of colonial sleep spaces that's assaulting your comfort. As gray pre-dawn light filters through the oiled paper windows, you get your first real look at where you've been sleeping. And honestly, it's like someone designed a bedroom based on a fever dream about efficiency and paranoia. The bed you're in isn't really a bed by your standards. It's more like a wooden cage with ropes. The frame towers nearly to the ceiling, not for aesthetic reasons, but because heat rises, and in winter, those extra 2 feet make the difference between sleeping and freezing. Thick curtains surround the entire structure, creating what colonists called a bed closet. You push aside the heavy fabric and immediately understand why they're there. The room temperature is roughly that of a modern refrigerator. Looking around, you notice beds crammed into spaces that defy logic. There's one built into what appears to be a cupboard in the wall, a press bed that folds up during the day to save space. Another sleeping spot is literally inside the chimney corner, a sort of cave-like nook built into the fireplace structure where the elderly typically sleep because it's the warmest spot in the house. You've seen studio apartments with better flow than this sleeping arrangement. The really bizarre part is the trundle bed sliding out from under the main bed where you slept. It's basically a human drawer where children or servants sleep, pulled out at night and pushed back during the day like some kind of medieval Murphy bed. The youngest kids might be sleeping in the truckle bed, which is essentially a box on wheels that can be moved around the house depending on who needs supervision or warmth. But wait, it gets weirder. In the corner, you spot what looks like a coffin standing upright. It's actually a settle bed, a wooden bench that transforms into a sleeping surface at night. During the day, it's seating. At night, it opens up to reveal a straw-stuffed mattress. It's like colonial furniture was designed by someone who really loved puzzles and really hated comfort. The bed construction itself is a masterpiece of discomfort engineering. Those ropes you felt digging into your back. They need to be tightened regularly with a special tool called a bed key, giving literal meaning to the phrase, sleep tight. The mattress, if you can call it that, is a cloth sack stuffed with whatever was available: straw, corn husks, or if you're lucky, feathers. But here's the thing about straw mattresses: they're basically apartment complexes for bed bugs, fleas, and lice. Colonial sleeping meant never sleeping alone, microscopically speaking. Historians still argue whether the average colonial home had more beds or more people needing beds. The answer usually involved creative mathematics and a flexible definition of bed. That windowsill might become a sleeping surface for an apprentice. The kitchen table could host a sleeping child. One Connecticut household inventory from 1693 lists 11 souls, but only 3 beds, leaving historians to wonder if the family operated in shifts or just played a nightly game of musical sleeping spots. You notice iron rings bolted into the walls at various heights and realize these are for hanging hammocks, not the breezy beach kind, but utilitarian canvas slings that could be strung up wherever space allowed. Ship's carpenters who built many colonial homes brought their naval space-saving tricks ashore, treating bedrooms like cargo holds that needed to accommodate maximum human storage. The placement of beds follows rules that seem arbitrary until you understand colonial logic. Beds never sit directly under windows because night air was considered poisonous. They're positioned so the foot doesn't point toward the door. That's how corpses are carried out. And symbolism matters when you're superstitious. The head of the bed must face east when possible, allowing sleepers to rise with the sun and, more importantly, to face Jerusalem while saying morning prayers. Some beds have weird additions that make you question colonial sanity. There's a rope stretched across the top of one bed frame with dried herbs hanging from it, not for aromatherapy, but to ward off illness and evil spirits. Another bed has what looks like a wooden shelf suspended over the pillow area. That's a bedstaff, used to hold candlesticks, but also doubles as a weapon if intruders break in during the night. The morning light grows stronger, and you hear whispers from the bed in the corner where the eldest daughter slept last night, except she wasn't alone. And before you jump to scandalous conclusions, you need to understand the absolutely bonkers colonial dating ritual called bundling. That wooden board running down the middle of her bed isn't a construction error, it's a bundling board, and it represents one of the most contradictory practices in American history. You watch as a young man emerges from the other side of the divided bed, fully clothed and looking remarkably well rested for someone who just spent the night next to his sweetheart with nothing but a plank of wood between them. This is courtship, colonial style, and it's going to break your modern brain that parents not only allowed this, but actively encouraged it. Here's how bundling worked when a young man came calling on a young woman. Instead of sitting in the parlor making awkward small talk, they'd be tucked into bed together, fully dressed, theoretically separated by that board, and supposedly just talking. The logic was purely practical in a way that only makes sense if you've been burning money all night in the form of candles and firewood. Why waste resources heating and lighting a room for courting when everyone's going to bed anyway? The practice was so common that furniture makers actually advertised bundling boards in newspapers. One Connecticut craftsman in 1785 marketed his as guaranteed to preserve virtue while encouraging matrimonial intentions. Parents would literally tuck their daughter and her suitor into bed, say goodnight, and trust that board to maintain propriety. It's like they invented the world's most tempting honor system. But here's where historians start arguing. How effective was that board, really? Court records from the period suggest not very. The number of babies born suspiciously soon after weddings in bundling communities was notably higher than in areas where the practice was forbidden. One minister in Pennsylvania complained that bundling boards were about as effective at preserving chastity as a spider web is at stopping a cannonball. You notice the young couple follows an elaborate ritual as they exit their shared sleeping arrangement. He leaves first, careful not to touch her side of the bed. She waits a full minute before emerging, smoothing her wrinkled dress. They don't make eye contact or speak, not from embarrassment, but because bundling etiquette demands they act as if the night never happened until they meet again in daylight, properly chaperoned. The really wild part is that different regions had different bundling rules. In some Dutch communities of New York, couples were sewn into separate sacks before being placed in bed together, like human burritos of propriety. Welsh settlers in Pennsylvania used a courting stick, a hollow tube through which couples could whisper sweet nothings while maintaining physical separation. Cape Cod communities took a different approach. The girl's mother would actually sleep in the same room to supervise. Foreign visitors were absolutely flabbergasted by bundling. One British officer wrote home in 1777 that American parents allow their daughters to be half naked in bed with strange men and then act surprised when nature takes its course. But colonists defended the practice fiercely, arguing it was more honest than European courtship customs where young people snuck around in secret. The bundling board itself became a craft object. Families would pass down elaborately carved boards through generations. Some featured religious symbols or stern Bible verses carved into the wood. Imagine trying to get romantic with a "thou shalt not commit adultery," literally between you and your beloved. Others had bells attached that would ring if the board shifted, turning the bed into an alarm system for frisky couples. You learn that bundling served another purpose. It was a test of a man's self-control and a woman's virtue. If a couple could spend multiple nights bundled together without incident, it proved they were ready for marriage. Of course, without incident was loosely defined, and creative couples found ways around, under, and through those boards that would impress a contortionist. The practice started dying out in the late 1700s as ministers began preaching against it, but it held on in rural areas well into the 1800s. Some historians argue it only ended when houses became large enough to have separate courting spaces and heating became affordable enough to warm them. Others suggest it was the rise of Victorian morality that finally killed the practice, replacing practical intimacy with rigid propriety. The sun climbs higher, flooding the main room with light, and you finally grasp the full chaos of colonial communal sleeping. Last night's carefully orchestrated bed assignments start to make sense as you watch the morning scramble of bodies emerging from every conceivable corner. This isn't just a family sharing space, it's an entire ecosystem of humans, animals, and sometimes strangers, all crammed into sleeping quarters that would violate every modern building code. You count the people emerging from various sleeping spots and lose track at 12. There's the main family of 7, 2 apprentices who slept on the workshop floor, a traveling minister who got the best bed, yours, which explains the midnight relocation, an elderly aunt in the chimney corner, and what appears to be a random traveler who knocked on the door after dark. Colonial hospitality meant never turning away someone needing shelter, even if it meant sleeping like sardines in a can. The concept of privacy doesn't exist here. You watch as people dress, undress, and perform morning ablutions in full view of everyone else. Children as young as 3 share beds with adults who aren't their parents. Maybe an uncle, a hired hand, or just whoever needed a warm spot. Modern anxiety about stranger danger would short circuit in this environment where communal sleeping was both necessity and social glue. Here's the mind-bending part. Colonists didn't see this as hardship. Sleeping alone was actually considered dangerous and unnatural. A person alone in bed was vulnerable to night terrors, evil spirits, and their own sinful thoughts. The warmth of another body wasn't just practical in unheated homes, it was spiritual protection. Even the wealthy, who could afford separate beds, often chose to share for companionship and safety. The sleeping arrangements follow a strict hierarchy that you're only now beginning to decode. The head of household and his wife get the best bed, usually the one with actual feather stuffing and the heaviest curtains. Honored guests displace children, who cascade down to progressively worse spots. Servants and slaves, if the household has them, sleep on the floor near the kitchen hearth or in the cellar. One Rhode Island inventory from 1736 lists Negro Caesar's bed as 1 board and 2 barrels, highlighting the cruel disparities in sleeping comfort. But communal sleeping created unexpected intimacies and social bonds. You hear the apprentices talking about dreams they shared, literally shared, as in they believed sleeping near someone could cause dream transference. The elderly aunt is lecturing children about their nighttime breathing, having monitored their health all night by listening to their snores. These people know each other's sleep habits better than most modern couples. The logistics of communal sleeping required rules that seem bizarre to modern sensibilities. Everyone had to go to bed at the same time because one person moving around could wake the entire household. Snoring was a communal problem solved by communal solutions, usually involving the nearest person poking the offender with a bedstaff. Some households had sleep marshals, typically older children tasked with monitoring younger ones and preventing bedwetting disasters. Historians still debate how colonists managed intimate relations in such crowded conditions. The answer involves a combination of strategic deftness, careful timing, and the kind of discretion that comes from mutual necessity. Court records suggest not everyone mastered this discretion. One Massachusetts couple was fined in 1665 for unseemly behavior while sharing quarters with diverse persons who did witness their congress. The morning revelation of who slept where sometimes created drama. That traveling merchant might have shared more than warmth with the eldest daughter. The apprentice who was supposed to sleep in the workshop somehow ended up in the main house. These arrangements were supposed to be practical, but human nature being what it is, they often became anything but. You notice something else about the communal sleeping space. It smells. Not just the expected body odor from unwashed humans, but a complex potpourri of smoke, tallow, dried herbs, and what can only be described as concentrated humanity. The chamber pots are being emptied now, carried past the eating area to the outdoor privy, adding another layer to the morning aromatherapy, the fringe historical detail that nobody talks about. Some colonists practiced shift sleeping, essentially hot bunking, where different people used the same bed in rotation. Day laborers might rent a bed for just the night hours, while night watchmen used it during the day. One bed could serve 3 or 4 people in a 24-hour period, maximizing the return on that expensive piece of furniture. As the morning cleanup continues, you get a shocking glimpse of colonial nightwear, or more accurately, the complete lack thereof. That rustling you heard all night wasn't just people tossing and turning. It was the sound of bodies wrapped in day clothes, because what colonists wore to bed would either scandalize or confuse you, depending on their social class and the temperature. You watch the wealthy merchant's wife emerge from behind her bed, curtains wearing what looks like a ghost costume, a long white linen shift that reaches her ankles, topped with a peculiar cap that makes her head look like a mushroom. This is high-end nightwear, and she owns exactly 2 of these shifts, which is considered luxurious. Most people you're watching simply slept in whatever they wore yesterday, maybe loosening a few buttons if they're feeling wild. The children are peeling off layers of daywear they slept in, revealing more layers underneath. It's like watching Russian nesting dolls undress. Colonial logic dictated that sleeping in clothes was warmer than changing into night clothes, and washing was infrequent enough that wearing the same outfit for a week straight was normal. You notice some of them have literal hay sticking out of their collars. They stuffed dried grass between layers for extra insulation. But here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone followed these rules. The teenage son emerges from his corner wearing nothing but his long shirt, his bare legs causing a minor scandal until he pulls on his breeches. Sleeping in your shirt was common for men and boys, which meant wearing just that long linen undershirt that reached mid-thigh. It was basically the colonial equivalent of sleeping in boxers, except everyone could see you stumble to the chamber pot at midnight. The real shocker comes when you learn about summer sleeping habits. When temperatures soared and humidity made clothes unbearable, many colonists, especially in the southern colonies, slept naked, completely naked. This caused endless pearl clutching among ministers who preached that nakedness in bed led to sin. But practical colonists ignored them. One Virginia planter wrote in his diary about the scandal when a house fire forced his entire family to evacuate in their natural state, traumatizing the neighbors more than the flames. You notice the elaborate headwear situation happening around you. Everyone, and I mean that everyone, is putting on some kind of head covering. Women tie on their night rails or bed caps, which aren't just fashion statements, but practical necessities. These caps keep hair oils off expensive pillows, provide warmth, and most importantly, maintain modesty. A woman with uncovered hair in bed was considered practically naked, even if she wore 3 layers of clothes. The men's nightcap game is equally serious. Those pointed caps that make them look like extras from a Christmas carol serve multiple purposes. Warmth, you lose most heat through your head. Cleanliness, hair washing happened maybe monthly. And medical beliefs about preventing head colds and maintaining balanced humors. Some men wore special, medicated caps infused with herbs to prevent nightmares or improve memory. Colonial nightwear beliefs ventured into truly weird territory. Red flannel was considered medicinal. Wearing red undergarments to bed supposedly prevented rheumatism. Some people wore bags of asafoetida, basically fermented plant resin that smells like death, around their necks to ward off disease. Others insisted on wearing their socks to bed, but inside out, which allegedly prevented foot cramps. The wealthy had specialized nightwear that seems absolutely bonkers by any standard. Night gloves to keep hands soft, special sleeping corsets, yes, really, to maintain posture, and even beauty masks made of leather or cloth soaked in various concoctions. One Connecticut woman's diary describes sleeping with raw veal tied to her face to prevent wrinkles. Imagine waking up to that in candlelight. Historians argue about when actual pajamas became a thing in America. The word comes from Hindi, brought back by British colonials from India, but dedicated sleepwear didn't really catch on until the late 1800s. Before that, you had this chaotic mix of day clothes, underclothes, and various states of undress that depended on season, status, and how much you cared about your minister's opinion. The laundry situation made nightwear choices even more critical. Washing happened weekly at best, monthly more commonly, and some winter garments might go an entire season without seeing soap. That shift the merchant's wife wore to bed, she'll wear it for at least a week straight, possibly a month. The funk accumulated in these garments created its own ecosystem. Colonists believed the body's natural oils and odors had protective properties, and washing too often removed this protection. The breakfast commotion suddenly quiets as the eldest daughter pulls out a worn leather journal and begins sketching strange symbols. "I had the most vivid dream," she announces, and everyone, literally everyone, stops what they're doing to listen. You're about to discover that colonial Americans were absolutely obsessed with their dreams, treating them like messages from God, predictions of the future, or warnings from dead relatives. And they had interpretation systems that would make modern psychoanalysts look like amateurs. You watch as family members gather around, offering interpretations with the seriousness of Supreme Court justices. Dreaming of teeth falling out means a family death is coming. Flying dreams indicate the foe trying to escape sin. Seeing a white horse promises good fortune, but a black horse warns of betrayal. The teenage son mentions dreaming of fish, and his mother immediately starts planning for pregnancy. Not his, obviously, but someone in the household will surely conceive soon, because fish dreams always mean babies. The dream journal itself is fascinating. Pages filled with detailed accounts dating back years, complete with outcomes noted in margins. Dreamed of flood. Cousin Martha died of fever 2 weeks hence. Saw 3 ravens. Found silver coin next day. It's like a colonial data set of confirmation bias, but these people believe in it with their whole hearts. You notice some dreams are written in code or Latin. These are the sexy ones they don't want the children reading. Here's where colonial dream interpretation gets genuinely weird. They had specific rules about which dreams counted. Dreams during first sleep were messages from God or angels. Dreams during second sleep came from the devil or indigestion. Dreams right before waking predicted the immediate future. Dreams on certain nights, especially biblical feast days, carried extra weight. One Massachusetts minister kept a 30-year dream diary that historians still study, trying to decode his symbolic system. The family's dream discussion reveals the intricate belief system surrounding sleep visions. Dreaming of the dead was especially significant. If deceased relatives appeared young and healthy, they were in heaven. If they looked tired or wounded, they needed prayers to escape purgatory. One woman describes dreaming of her dead infant, and everyone agrees the baby is asking for baptism. Retroactive baptism for dead children was a heated theological debate. You learn about dream books, hand-copied manuals of dream interpretation passed down through families like heirlooms. These weren't standardized. Each family developed their own symbol systems based on accumulated experience. Your host family's dream book includes entries like bees equals industry unless swarming, then gossip, and bread equals prosperity if white, poverty if brown, death if moldy. It's like a colonial meme collection, but with life or death seriousness. The really bizarre part is dream sharing. Colonists believed that telling a dream before breakfast made it more likely to come true, but telling it after eating nullified its power. Some dreams had to be told to running water to wash away bad omens. Others required specific rituals. Bad dreams were given to the first person you met, like a psychological hot potato. Imagine starting your day with someone dumping their nightmare on you as a protective measure. Colonial dream practices included dream fasting, deliberately eating or avoiding certain foods to induce specific dreams. Cheese before bed brought visions of the future. Beans caused prophet dreams, but also nightmares. One Virginia household swore by placing Bible verses under pillows to direct dream content, essentially trying to program their subconscious with scripture. They had Pinterest-worthy dream boards before Pinterest existed. Historians still debate whether colonists experienced different types of dreams than modern people. The two-sleep pattern meant they often woke directly from REM sleep, making dreams more vivid and memorable. Some scholars argue that communal sleeping created shared dream experiences, multiple people reporting similar dreams on the same night, possibly influenced by group sleep disturbances or whispered midnight conversations. The dark side of dream obsession involved witch trials. Dreams were admitted as evidence in court. If someone dreamed you cursed them, that dream could literally get you hanged. The Salem witch trials included multiple cases where dreams of spectral evidence, seeing someone's spirit doing evil while their body slept elsewhere, led to convictions. One woman was executed partly because three people dreamed of her churning butter backward. Obviously, a satanic act. You notice children being taught dream interpretation like multiplication tables. They recite dream meanings. Snake with legs means false friend. Snake without legs means hidden enemy. It's systematic indoctrination into a worldview where the sleeping mind accesses truths the waking mind cannot. Even skeptics hedged their bets. Benjamin Franklin mocked dream interpretation publicly, but kept his own dream journal privately. The morning dream discussion reminds you of your own midnight awakening, and suddenly, the strange activities during the watching hour make more sense. As the family continues their breakfast preparations, you piece together the full picture of what colonial Americans did during those wakeful hours between first and second sleep, and it's far more varied and bizarre than just a prayer and baby making. You remember the sounds from last night, whispered conversations, rustling papers, soft footsteps on creaky boards. The watching hour was like a secret society meeting that everyone attended, but nobody formally acknowledged. The father had pulled out not just his Bible, but also his account books, squinting in candlelight to update ledgers. Multitasking apparently existed before the term was invented. Spiritual and financial accountability handled in one efficient midnight session. The mother had been working on something that looked like knitting, but was actually telling the hours, a form of prayer where each stitch represented a specific devotion. She'd created entire blankets this way, essentially wearing her prayers. The rhythmic clicking of needles served as both meditation and productivity, turning insomnia into holiness. Some women believed textiles created during the watching hour had protective properties, especially baby blankets knitted while pregnant. But here's where midnight activities got truly weird. You learn about night walking, a practice where people literally left their homes during the watching hour to conduct business. Bakers started their ovens at 2 a.m., farmers checked animals, midwives made rounds. There was an entire shadow economy operating in those dark hours that historians are only now uncovering through court records and diary entries. The teenage son admits he spent his watching hour practicing dumb shows, essentially pantomime performances done in complete silence to avoid waking others. This wasn't just entertainment, it was preparation for social gatherings where such skills were highly valued. Imagine dedicating your 1 a.m. wake time to becoming a better party mime. Colonial priorities were different. You discover that some watching hour activities were definitely not parent approved. Young people developed elaborate communication systems, specific sequences of coughs, bed creaks, or shifted objects that conveyed messages across the communal sleeping space. It was like colonial Morse code for midnight flirting. One diary from 1743 describes a complex courting ritual conducted entirely through strategic snoring patterns. The scholarly debates during watching hours were legendary. Ministers prepared sermons, lawyers reviewed cases, and doctors diagnosed patients, all by candlelight in the dead of night. One Harvard student's diary reveals he memorized entire Latin texts during watching hours, believing the mind was most receptive when freed from daylight's distractions. Of course, this same student failed his exams, suggesting midnight cramming worked about as well then it as now. Watching hour correspondence was its own genre. Letters written between sleeps had a specific quality, more emotional, less guarded, often containing confessions or declarations that daylight letters avoided. Postal historians have identified these night letters by their meandering style and ink blots from tired hands. Some colonial merchants conducted their most sensitive business negotiations via watching hour letters, believing night thoughts were more honest. The medicinal activities during watching hours border on absurd. People performed midnight purges, taking emetics or laxatives timed to work during the watch. The theory was that the body expelled illness more effectively while partially asleep. Others practiced night breathing, specific respiratory exercises believed to cure everything from consumption to melancholy. One Connecticut doctor prescribed his patients to spend their watching hour naked in moonlight, absorbing lunar medicine. You learn about watching hour food, which had its own rules. Eating during the watch could either feed the spirit or invite demons, depending on what you consumed. Bread and water were safe. Meat was dangerous. Dairy products caused prophetic dreams, but also madness. Some households kept special night foods, items blessed by ministers specifically for watching hour consumption. Imagine keeping holy snacks for your 2 a.m. munchies. The children had their own watching hour culture. Older kids told younger ones night stories, tales specifically crafted for darkness that were forbidden during daylight. These weren't your cozy bedtime stories, but genuinely terrifying accounts of local hauntings, demonic possessions, and cautionary tales about children who misbehaved during watching hours. It was systematic trauma disguised as entertainment. The most fringe watching hour activity? Dream planting, whispering suggestions into sleeping people's ears to influence their dreams. Practitioners believed the watching hour made sleepers especially susceptible to suggestion. Parents planted moral lessons, spurned lovers planted guilt, and enemies planted curses. It was colonial inception, performed nightly in households across America. Whether it worked is debatable, but the practice was widespread enough that some colonies passed laws against it. The morning sun now streams through the windows, but you notice everyone still performing strange protective rituals left over from the night. The mother carefully sweeps the salt from the windowsills into a special pouch. This isn't thrown away, but saved for next bedtime's protection. You're beginning to understand that colonial sleep wasn't just about rest. It was a nightly battle against supernatural forces that required specific weapons, strategies, and sometimes negotiations with the spirit world. You watch the youngest child recite a prayer while walking backward around her bed 3 times. This isn't a game, it's deadly serious protection against the night hag, a supernatural entity colonists believed sat on people's chests, causing sleep paralysis. The fact that you can scientifically explain sleep paralysis today doesn't diminish the terror these people felt when they couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and saw shadowy figures in their rooms. The bedroom reveals evidence of last night's spiritual warfare. Iron horseshoes nailed above the door, points facing up to catch evil, rowan branches tied with red thread hanging from the bedposts, a knife stuck in the headboard, not for human intruders, but to cut the path of witches who might fly through. One bed has scissors left open underneath it, because everyone knows witches can't resist counting the holes in scissors and will be trapped until dawn. Here's where colonial sleep superstitions get genuinely disturbing. They believed beds could be cursed. If someone died in a bed, it might retain their spirit. Worse, if they died badly, suicide, murder, or childbirth, the bed became a portal for malevolent forces. Families would burn cursed beds rather than risk sleeping in them. One Massachusetts family moved their entire household after 3 family members had nightmares in the same bed, convinced it was possessed. The witch bottle under the floorboards isn't just folklore. You learn these were standard bedroom installations, filled with nails, urine, and hair, then buried upside down. They supposedly trapped any curse directed at the sleeper. Archaeologists still find these bottles in colonial homes, their contents preserved and deeply unsettling. Imagine explaining to your contractor why you need bottles of pee installed under your bedroom floor. You notice the children wearing small bags around their necks, sleep sachets containing protective herbs and written charms. The contents vary by region. Pennsylvania Germans used hex signs written on paper. New England Puritans preferred Bible verses, and Southern colonists mixed African and European traditions with bags containing everything from graveyard dirt to mercury. Yes, they were literally sleeping with toxic metals against their skin for protection. The dream catcher hanging in the window isn't Native American. It's a colonial creation called a witch sieve, made from a flour sifter with specific patterns woven through the mesh. It supposedly caught evil spirits like a supernatural colander. Some households had different sieves for different threats. One for witches, one for demons, one for the ghosts of unbaptized children who tried to steal breath from living babies. Historians still debate the midnight visitor phenomenon. Colonists frequently reported supernatural beings entering bedrooms. The old hag sat on chests. The shadow man stood in corners. Fetch lights, ghost candles, floated through rooms. Were these sleep paralysis hallucinations, actual intruders mistaken for spirits, or something else? The consistency of reports across different regions suggests shared cultural expectations shaped these experiences. The really weird part, some colonists tried to trap these night visitors. They'd leave flour on the floor to capture footprints, place tar on windowsills to stick flying witches, or set up elaborate thread webs across rooms to detect supernatural movement. One Rhode Island man built what he called a spirit cage, essentially a Faraday cage made of iron bars around his bed. He slept inside it for 3 years before deciding the construction itself was cursed. Bedtime prayers weren't just religious devotion, they were protective spells. Children learned specific formulations. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. Four corners to my bed, four angels round my head, one to watch and one to pray, and two to bear my soul away. Missing a word could leave gaps in protection. Some prayers had to be said while touching iron, others while holding bread, creating elaborate bedtime rituals that took serious time. The social pressure to maintain these protections was intense. If someone in your household had nightmares, neighbors might suspect you weren't performing proper protective rituals. Worse, they might think you were the source of evil. One Virginia woman was ostracized after admitting she didn't believe in sleep protection when her daughter developed night terrors. The community blamed the mother's skepticism for inviting evil into their midst. The family bustles around you in full morning activity now, and you realize with growing dread that you've been awake for 2 hours already, and it's only 6 a.m. The rooster that woke everyone at 4 a.m. wasn't just a farm cliche. It was a precisely calibrated biological alarm clock that colonial Americans depended on with their lives. But the rooster was just one player in an elaborate system of wake-up calls that makes your phone's alarm seem laughably simple. You learn that colonial families didn't just keep one rooster, they kept several, specifically chosen for their crowing schedules. The first cock crowed around 3 a.m., the second cock at 4 a.m., and the day cock at proper sunrise. Wealthy households bred roosters for punctuality like show dogs, and a reliable dawn crower could sell for the price of a milk cow. Imagine paying thousands of dollars for a bird that screams on schedule. But roosters were just the beginning. The town watchman made rounds every hour, calling out the time and weather. 4 o'clock and fair, all's well, except when it wasn't, like 3 o'clock and fire on King Street. These human alarm clocks had specific songs or calls for different hours, and experienced townspeople could tell time by the watchman's tune without fully waking. It was like having a musical clock that occasionally announced disasters. Church bells provided the community soundtrack, but their ringing patterns were surprisingly complex. Single bells marked hours, rapid peals meant fire, slow tolls announced deaths, and specific sequences called people to different activities. You had to learn your town's bell language, or miss everything from worship services to tax collections. One Connecticut town had 47 different bell patterns, essentially requiring citizens to master ecclesiastical Morse code. Here's where it gets weird. Knocker-uppers. Yes, that was their actual job title. These were people hired to wake others by tapping on their windows with long poles, shooting peas at upper floors, or even using primitive snuffer sticks to rattle shutters. The knocker-upper had to wake people without disturbing the whole street, developing personalized techniques for each client. Some used soft whistles, others had specific tap patterns. It was like human snooze buttons with sticks. The wealthy had even stranger wake-up methods. Water clocks that dropped pebbles into metal pans. Candle alarms where a nail would fall and clang when the wax melted to a certain point. One Boston merchant rigged a Rube Goldberg contraption involving a water wheel, pulleys, and a hammer that struck a bell, essentially building a grandfather clock out of household items and spite. But the most bizarre colonial alarm? Trained animals. Beyond roosters, people used geese, excellent guard animals with punctual honking schedules, peacocks, whose screams could wake the dead, and even parrots taught to shriek at dawn. One Virginia planter trained his parrot to shout, "Get up, you lazy swine," every morning, which backfired spectacularly when the bird learned to do it at random times for attention. Natural alarms played crucial roles too. Colonists positioned beds to catch first light, used the pressure of full bladders as wake-up calls, drinking specific amounts before bed to ensure dawn urgency, and even trained their bodies to wake at temperature changes. Fireplaces were banked to die at specific times, so the cold would wake light sleepers, who then woke everyone else. The social wake-up system was equally complex. First person awake was responsible for waking others, creating chains of responsibility. Children woke parents, parents woke servants, servants woke animals. Miss your link in the chain, and the whole household schedule collapsed. Some communities had wake-up partnerships where neighbors took turns ensuring everyone rose on time. Historians debate whether colonists actually needed less sleep or just functioned on permanent exhaustion. Diary entries suggest the latter. Constant complaints about tired servants, drowsy congregations, and people falling asleep during important meetings. One minister noted that his entire congregation dozed through sermons until he started scheduling them after the watching hour when everyone was mysteriously alert. The punishment for oversleeping could be severe. Apprentices who missed dawn work faced beatings. Servants could be docked pay. In some Puritan communities, chronic oversleepers were literally put in stocks as public examples of sloth. One Massachusetts town had a sluggard's bell rung specifically to shame late risers, tolling their names through the streets. The fringe historical detail nobody mentions. Some colonists deliberately avoided wake-up systems, joining what historians now call night owl rebellions. These people worked at night, slept through dawn, and faced social ostracism for violating natural order. They formed underground communities of night workers, artists, and rebels who rejected the tyranny of the rooster. Colonial America had subcultures, and some of them were defined entirely by sleep schedules. As autumn light filters through the windows, you notice the family beginning preparations you don't understand. They're literally weatherproofing their beds. The seasonal shift in colonial sleep habits is about to reveal itself, and it's far more extreme than just adding an extra blanket. Winter sleep was basically hibernation with extra steps, while summer sleep became a sweaty battle against insects, heat, and the very real possibility of suffocating in your own bed curtains. You watch them stuff dried corn husks between the bed ropes and the mattress, creating an insulation layer that crackles with every movement. The bed curtains, which seemed excessive in moderate weather, now get additional layers, old quilts, worn cloaks, anything to create a fabric cave that traps body heat. They're essentially building a tent inside a bedroom inside a house. Russian nesting doll-style protection against cold that could literally kill you in your sleep. The winter sleeping attire is equally intense. People layer like they're attempting an Arctic expedition, wearing multiple shirts, stockings, mittens, and those omnipresent nightcaps. Some colonists slept in modified bear skins or wolf pelts, looking like taxidermy projects come to life. The smell must have been extraordinary: wet fur, unwashed bodies, and months of accumulated skin cells creating a microbiome that would fascinate modern scientists and horrify everyone else. Here's the bizarre part. Colonial Americans believed winter sleep should be longer but lighter. They adjusted their two-sleep pattern to have a shortened watching hour, sometimes skipping it entirely during the coldest months. The theory was that winter required more continuous rest to maintain body heat, but sleep quality suffered from the constant battle against freezing. Imagine sleeping 12 hours, but waking exhausted from shivering all night. Bed warmers reveal colonial ingenuity and desperation. The standard warming pan filled with coals was just the beginning. People used heated bricks wrapped in cloth, metal containers filled with hot water, even heated sand in leather bags. One innovative New Hampshire family trained their cats to sleep under the covers first, using them as living preheaters before climbing in themselves. The cats, apparently, had mixed feelings about this arrangement, but summer sleep was its own special hell. Those same bed curtains that saved lives in winter became suffocation chambers in July. Colonists faced an impossible choice: keep curtains closed and roast, or open them and be devoured by mosquitoes, flies, and various other insects that viewed humans as walking buffets. The solutions they developed would make modern camping seem luxurious. Mosquito netting was for the wealthy. Everyone else used smoke. They'd burn specific herbs in the bedroom before sleep, creating a fumigation that supposedly repelled insects, but definitely repelled oxygen. Some hung bags of pennyroyal or tansy from bed frames. Others rubbed their skin with bear grease mixed with herbs. The combination of smoke, grease, and summer sweat created an atmosphere that probably did repel mosquitoes, along with any remaining will to live. The summer sleeping positions were strategic. Colonists developed specific poses to maximize air circulation while maintaining modesty. The spread eagle, limbs extended but covered by a sheet, the latter lying on one side with legs at different heights, and the reverse turtle on one's back with knees raised to tent the sheet. Family members had to coordinate their positions to avoid touching in the heat while still fitting everyone in bed. Historians have found evidence of radical summer sleep schedules. Some colonists simply gave up on night sleep during heat waves, adopting Mediterranean-style siestas and working at night. Others moved their beds outdoors, sleeping on porches or even in trees. Platform beds built in sturdy oaks were apparently a thing. One Virginia family spent entire summers sleeping in their root cellar, choosing dampness over heat. The seasonal transition periods were particularly weird. Colonial advice manuals recommended gradually adjusting bed configurations over weeks to acclimate the body. Too rapid a change from winter to summer sleeping could cause blood confusion or humor imbalance. They had specific dates for removing bed warmers, changing mattress stuffing, and switching from wool to linen sheets, like a bureaucratic approach to comfort. The really strange seasonal practice? Dream seasonality. Colonists believed winter dreams were more significant because the cold crystallized visions, while summer dreams were fever phantoms to be ignored. They kept separate dream journals for different seasons, interpreting the same symbols differently depending on temperature. Dreaming of fire in winter meant coming prosperity. In summer, it warned of actual fire danger. Weather predicting through sleep was another colonial obsession. Restless sleep meant storms coming. Excessive dreams predicted temperature changes. Some claimed they could forecast weathers by how their joints felt in bed. Given that their homes were barely insulated, they probably could. Their bodies were essentially barometers, wrapped in scratchy wool. You hear a sharp smack followed by crying from the loft, and witness something that makes modern sleep training look like gentle suggestion. Colonial parents teaching children bedroom discipline through methods that would horrify today's pediatricians. The 6-year-old who just got swatted was caught sleeping past the designated wake time by 5 minutes. This isn't cruelty by colonial standards. It's necessary preparation for a world where oversleeping could mean starvation. The toddler in the corner is tied to his bed with soft ropes, not as punishment, but as standard practice to prevent night wandering. Colonial parents believed children who roamed at night were either possessed or destined for moral corruption. The rope is just loose enough to allow turning, but not escape, a kind of primitive sleep restraint system that every household considered essential until children proved their sleep virtue. And you watch the morning ritual of checking the younger children's beds for evidence of night sins. Bedwetting was expected until age 3, tolerated until 5, and severely punished afterward. The dried herbs hanging above children's beds aren't just for pleasant dreams. They're meant to prevent weak bladder spirits. Children who wet their beds after age 5 faced public humiliation, reduced food rations, or sleeping on bare floors until they learned control. The sleep positioning rules for children are disturbingly specific. Babies must sleep on their backs to prevent the devil from stealing their breath. Toddlers sleep on their right sides to aid digestion. Older children alternate sides nightly to ensure balanced growth. One child sleeps with a board strapped to her back, not as torture, but to ensure proper posture development. Colonial parents believed sleep position determined adult body shape. Here's where it gets truly weird. Dream suppression training. Children were taught to control their dreams through pre-sleep recitations, physical positions, and dietary restrictions. Bad dreams meant moral failure. Good dreams had to be immediately reported for parental interpretation. Children who claimed dreamless sleep were considered blessed. Those with vivid dreams underwent spiritual counseling that sounds suspiciously like attempted brainwashing. The bedtime prayer regime for children was militaristic. Missing a single word meant starting over. Yawning during prayers earned punishment. Some families required children to pray in uncomfortable positions, kneeling on dried beans or holding heavy books to ensure they stayed awake through lengthy devotions. The prayers themselves were terrifying. focusing on death, judgment, and the very real possibility of not waking up. Sleep deprivation was a common punishment. Children who misbehaved were kept awake for extra hours of prayer or chores. Some parents used wake up sticks, switches kept by the bed specifically for rousing lazy children. The colonial belief that too much sleep made children stupid and sinful meant many operated on what we'd now recognize as chronic exhaustion, which probably explained a lot of the crying. The segregation of children's sleeping spaces followed rules that seem arbitrary until you understand colonial logic. Boys over 7 couldn't share beds with sisters. Girls over 12 needed their own beds to preserve marriage value. But poverty meant these rules were constantly broken, leading to elaborate barrier systems, boards, rolled blankets, even parents sleeping between children to maintain propriety in shared beds. Historians debate the psychological impact of colonial sleep training. Diaries from the period show adults with severe sleep anxieties, nightmares about oversleeping, and obsessive bedtime rituals that suggest lasting trauma. One Massachusetts man recorded checking his children 17 times nightly to ensure they maintained proper sleep positions. Another woman's diary describes lifelong insomnia stemming from childhood punishment for sleep talking. The apprentice system added another layer of harsh sleep training. Master craftsmen controlled apprentices' sleep schedules completely, often waking them hours before the family for extra work. Sleeping past the master's wake time meant no breakfast. Second offense meant no meals all day. Some apprentice contracts specifically outlined sleep punishments, including correction by rod for sluggardly rising. Night terrors in children were handled with stunning ignorance. Colonists believed nightmares came from moral failure, witchcraft, or bad diet, never considering that maybe terrifying children about death and damnation every bedtime might cause anxiety. Treatments included prayer, obviously, dietary purges, and sometimes beating the devil out, literally striking children who woke screaming to drive out evil spirits. The strangest childhood sleep practice? Dream sharing between siblings. Children were encouraged to whisper their dreams to each other immediately upon waking, before adults could hear. This created secret dream languages between siblings, coded ways of sharing fears and desires that parents couldn't punish. Some adult diaries describe maintaining these dream codes with siblings throughout life, a private language born from shared childhood sleep trauma. The coughing from the corner bed hasn't stopped since you woke, and now you understand why colonial bedrooms sometimes doubled as death chambers. The elderly aunt's labored breathing fills the quiet moments, and everyone pretends not to notice the vinegar-soaked cloths hanging around her bed, a futile attempt to purify the bad air that colonists believed caused illness. Sleep and sickness were so intertwined in colonial life that bedrooms served as hospitals, quarantine wards, and sometimes morgues. You watch the mother prepare a terrifying concoction at the bedside, mercury mixed with honey, crushed beetles, and what might be mouse droppings. This is medicine, colonial style, and it's about to be administered to someone whose main problem might just be a cold. The belief that sleep was when the body was most vulnerable to disease, but also most receptive to cure, led to medical practices that definitely killed more people than they saved. The concept of night air as poisonous wasn't just superstition to these people, it was medical fact. Windows stayed shut even in sweltering heat because the miasma that rose after dark carried everything from consumption to madness. The irony that their sealed rooms were breeding grounds for actual disease, while fresh air might have saved them, is lost on everyone except you. They'd rather suffocate than risk the night vapors. Here's where medical sleep beliefs get truly bizarre. Colonists thought different diseases attacked during different sleep phases. Fever struck during first sleep. Apoplexy waited for the watching hour. Consumption preferred second sleep. They timed their medicines accordingly, waking sick people at specific hours to administer treatments that ranged from useless to lethal. Imagine being woken at 2 a.m. to drink liquid lead because that's when it best fought brain fever. The positioning of sick beds followed rules that would baffle modern medicine. Heads had to face east for recovery, west for dying, to follow the sun's path to ease the soul's journey. Beds were raised or lowered based on the illness, high for dropsy, low for fever. Some households built special fever beds with holes cut in the mattress for bloodletting drainage. Yes, they were literally bleeding people through their mattresses. Colonial sleep medicine included dream diagnosis, analyzing sick people's dreams to determine treatment. Dreaming of water meant excess phlegm requiring purging. Fire dreams indicated hot blood needing cooling. Physicians kept dream interpretation charts specifically for medical purposes. One Virginia doctor's journal contains hundreds of patient dreams with corresponding treatments, creating a kind of subconscious symptom catalog. The remedies applied during sleep make modern alternative medicine look scientific. Sleeping with raw bacon tied to the throat for quinsy, dead pigeons placed on the head for headaches, live puppies laid on the chest for breathing problems. The warmth and movement supposedly drew out illness. One treatment for insomnia involved sleeping with a bag of dried human skull fragments under the pillow. Where they got the skull fragments is a question best left unasked. Quarantine practices turned bedrooms into prisons. Sick family members were literally sealed in, windows nailed shut, doors marked with warning signs, food passed through slots. But here's the kicker. Healthy family members often continued sleeping in the same room, just farther from the sickbed. They believed distance within the room mattered more than actual isolation. A rope down the middle of the room supposedly stopped disease transmission. Historians have traced disease outbreaks through sleeping arrangements. Entire families wiped out because they maintained communal sleeping during epidemics. The 1721 Boston smallpox outbreak spread fastest in households that refused to separate sick and healthy sleepers. Yet even watching neighbors die didn't change beliefs about family, sleeping arrangements being sacred. The preparation for death in bed was ritualized beyond modern comprehension. Once someone was deemed dying, the bed was turned to face the door, easier for the soul to exit. Family members took shifts sleeping next to the dying person to witness the moment of passing. Missing someone's death moment was social failure. Children were woken to watch relatives die, supposedly to prepare them for mortality, but probably just traumatizing them forever. Post-death bed handling was equally specific. The deathbed had to be completely dismantled, mattress burned, ropes replaced. Some families abandoned bedrooms entirely after deaths, sealing them like tombs. Others performed elaborate cleansing rituals, smoking the room with sulfur, washing everything with lye, hanging herbs to purify the death taint. The deceased's pillow was often saved and given to their favorite child, which seems sweet until you remember it was probably disease infected. The weirdest medical sleep belief? Therapeutic bed sharing. Sick people were sometimes prescribed sleeping with healthy individuals to balance humors. Young people with consumption slept with elderly people for their cooling influence. Men with fevers shared beds with women for temperament adjustment. It was like medical musical beds, spreading disease with good intentions. The merchant who owns this house starts rearranging sleeping furniture, and you realize you're witnessing the most brutally honest expression of colonial social hierarchy: who sleeps where. In this world, your bed doesn't just reflect your status, it literally determines your chances of surviving the night. The quality of your sleep depends entirely on your position in society, and that position could be measured in inches from the floor and feet from the fireplace. You watch as the merchant checks his massive oak bedstead with its feather mattress, embroidered curtains, and, the ultimate luxury, a real pillow filled with down instead of straw. This bed cost more than a laborer's yearly wages. He sleeps 18 inches off the ground on a frame that took 6 men to assemble, while his indentured servant curls up on a corn husk mat that wouldn't pass for a modern dog bed. The vertical distance between their sleeping surfaces represents an unbridgeable social chasm. The enslaved people in this household don't even get the courtesy of being considered in the sleeping arrangements. Their quarters are in the cellar or above the kitchen, spaces that flood in rain or fill with smoke. They sleep on bare boards with a single moth-eaten blanket shared between 2 or 3 people. When historians find these sleeping spaces, they often mistake them for storage areas because surely humans didn't sleep in conditions that would violate modern regulations for keeping animals. Here's what really shows the sleep hierarchy: warmth distribution. The master bedroom sits directly above the main fireplace, capturing rising heat. Adult children get rooms adjacent to chimneys. Servants sleep in unheated spaces where water freezes in wash basins. The stable boys literally sleep with horses for warmth and probably get better accommodations than house slaves, because horses are valuable property worth protecting from cold. The bedding itself broadcasts social position like a fabric Facebook status. Wealthy colonists have sheets of fine Holland linen, changed weekly by servants who wash them in lavender water. Middle-class families make do with rough homespun, washed monthly if they're lucky. The poor use the same sheet until it disintegrates, then patch it with whatever fabric they can scavenge. One inventory from 1748 lists a servant's bedding as 1 sheet, more holes than cloth. But the real social warfare happens in the guest bed situation. Offering your best bed to a guest of equal or higher status was mandatory. Refuse and face social suicide. This meant families got bumped down the sleeping hierarchy whenever visitors arrived. Children ejected to the floor, servants to the barn, everyone shifting downward like some nightmare game of musical beds. One diary describes a judge's visit that resulted in 13 people reorganizing their sleeping arrangements for a week. The furniture quality speaks volumes about colonial priorities. A wealthy family might own beds worth more than their house, carved headboards with family crests, imported mahogany frames, silk bed curtains. These weren't just furniture, but investment pieces that appreciated in value. Poor families built bed frames from green wood that warped and split, held together with prayers and determination rather than proper joinery. Travel sleeping arrangements revealed portable hierarchy. Wealthy travelers carried their own bedding, complete with collapsible frames and personal chamber pots. Middle-class folks hoped for clean straw at inns. The poor slept in common rooms on the floor, packed together like cargo. One French traveler wrote home in horror about American inns where persons of quality had to share beds with common mechanics, as if democracy itself was contagious through proximity sleeping. Historians studying probate records discovered that bed ownership predicted life expectancy better than any other factor. Own a feather bed, you'll likely see 60, sleep on straw, lucky to make 40. The correlation between sleep quality and health was obvious even then, but colonists interpreted it backward. They thought poor people died young because poverty was God's punishment, not because sleeping on damp floors and freezing rooms destroyed their health. The intersection of gender and class in sleeping arrangements created particularly cruel situations. Female servants sleeping in kitchens faced constant vulnerability. Enslaved women had no privacy, no locks, no recourse against nighttime visitors. The same society that obsessed over bundling boards for courting couples saw nothing wrong with housing arrangements that left vulnerable women exposed to predation. The ultimate status symbol wasn't just having a good bed, it was having multiple beds. Spare beds meant you could properly host guests, separate sick family members, and maintain propriety. Some wealthy households had state beds that nobody actually slept in, just for display. Imagine maintaining furniture worth a fortune that existed solely to impress visitors, while your servants froze on kitchen floors. Even death couldn't escape the sleep hierarchy. Wealthy colonists had elaborate deathbeds brought out for their final moments. The poor died where they normally slept, if they were lucky. Some died in poorhouses, on shared straw that wouldn't be changed between corpses. The phrase dying in one's own bed wasn't about comfort. It was about having enough status to own a bed to die in. Dawn arrives properly now, flooding the house with pale light, and you witness the chaotic orchestration of colonial morning rituals that make modern routines look positively leisurely. Everyone moves with practiced urgency, transforming the sleeping space back into living space with movements so ingrained they could probably do them unconscious, which, judging by their faces, some of them might be. You watch the youngest children stumble down from the loft, immediately dropping to their knees for morning prayers before their feet properly touch the floor. No bathroom breaks, no stretching, no gentle wake up period, just immediate submission to the day's demands. Their voices mumble through devotions while their bodies sway with exhaustion, but nobody dares skip this ritual. Morning prayers missed meant evening meals denied. The chamber pots begin their procession, a parade of human waste carried through living spaces to the outdoor privy. There's a specific order: master first, then family by age, servants last. The enslaved people empty everyone else's pots before dealing with their own needs. The smell is overwhelming, but colonists barely notice. This is just morning, same as every morning since childhood. Your modern sensibilities reel at the casual handling of waste, inches from where breakfast is being prepared. Washing happens, sort of. A single basin of cold water passes from person to person, each splashing their face and hands in increasingly murky liquid. The master gets fresh water, everyone else gets gradually grayer versions. Teeth cleaning involves salt or crushed charcoal rubbed with a finger, if it happens at all. Hair gets a quick smooth down with hands still damp from communal wash water. The entire family's hygiene routine takes less time than your morning shower. The bed transformation begins immediately. Those massive curtained beds that dominated the room must disappear into daytime respectability. Curtains tied back, bedding aired, but not too long because morning air is nearly as dangerous as night air. Children work in practiced teams, tightening bed ropes, flipping mattresses, smoothing coverlets. The rope bed that tortured your spine all night requires daily maintenance, or it becomes a hammock within a week. Here's the part that breaks modern brains. Breakfast happens in the same space where chamber pots were just emptied, using the same hands that just handled waste, with minimal washing between activities. The colonial stomach was apparently made of iron, or perhaps constant exposure to pathogens created immunity that would impress modern epidemiologists. Food appears on the same surfaces where people were sleeping an hour ago. Spaces transform without sanitization, and nobody dies, at least not immediately. The morning inspection of bedding for vermin is routine as checking your phone. Bed bugs, fleas, and lice are accepted roommates, controlled but never eliminated. Children pick bugs from sheets with the casual efficiency of gathering berries. One daughter collects bed bugs in a tin for chicken feed, waste not, want not. The idea of sleeping without insect companions would seem as impossible as sleeping without darkness. Work assignments flow naturally from sleep positions. Those who slept nearest the kitchen start breakfast. Loft sleepers tend animals since they're already climbing. The unlucky soul who slept by the door becomes the morning messenger. Your bed placement last night determined your morning job today, creating a kind of geographic destiny within household walls. The speed of morning transformation is breathtaking. Within an hour, all evidence of sleep vanishes. Beds become benches, bedrooms become workrooms, night clothes become day clothes, often the same garments. The vulnerable intimacy of communal sleeping disappears behind daytime formality. The same people who hurt each other's dreams and bodily functions now maintain proper social distance. Colonial morning efficiency came from necessity. Daylight was burning, and every moment spent on comfort was money lost. But the psychological switch required to go from shared vulnerability to hierarchical efficiency seems impossible to modern minds. How did they compartmentalize the intimacy of communal sleeping with the formality of daytime interaction? The answer lies in absolute routine, movements so practiced they required no thought, no emotion, just muscle memory and social conditioning. The final morning ritual is the gratitude prayer, not for waking up, though given the sleeping conditions that seems appropriate, but for protection through the night. Everyone who survived another night in their beds gives thanks, genuinely and fervently, because they all know someone who didn't. Sleep in colonial America was dangerous business, and in every morning was a small victory over darkness, disease, and death. As breakfast begins and the house fully transforms into its daytime configuration, you're left marveling at the sheer complexity of colonial sleep culture. What seemed like simple historical poverty was actually an intricate system of beliefs, practices, and adaptations that shaped every aspect of life. These people didn't just sleep differently, they inhabited an entirely different relationship with night, rest, and the vulnerability of unconsciousness. The sun climbs higher, chasing away the last shadows of night, and the colonial household hums with activity. Soon, you realize, the whole cycle will begin again. In 12 hours, these same people will transform their world back into a sleeping space, hang their protective charms, light their watching hour candles, and surrender once more to the strange rhythms of pre-industrial sleep. It's exhausting just thinking about it, which, ironically, is probably how they felt too. As the family settles into their daily routines, the morning chaos gradually calming into productive rhythm, you feel yourself becoming drowsy. The warmth of the rising sun, the gentle bustle of colonial life, the security of surviving another night, it all combines to create unexpected peace. Your eyelids grow heavy, your breathing deepens, and you drift into that timeless space between sleeping and waking. The sounds of colonial morning fade into something softer, more distant, somewhere far away. A rooster crows one last time. The scratch of homespun blankets becomes the whisper of modern cotton. The flickering candlelight transforms into the steady glow of electric peace. You're traveling back through centuries of sleep evolution, returning to your own bed, your own time, your own peculiar relationship with rest. But you'll never forget what you've learned, that our ancestors navigated the vulnerable hours of sleep with courage, creativity, and communal bonds we can barely imagine. They faced each night as an adventure and each morning as a victory. They turned the simple act of sleeping into a complex dance of survival, superstition, and surprising tenderness. Sweet dreams, time traveler. May your modern bed feel like the miracle it truly is. And if you wake at 2 a.m. tonight, spare a thought for your colonial predecessors, lighting their candles for the watching hour, turning sleep itself into an act of defiance against the dark. The past is never as far away as we think. Sometimes it's just a dream away, waiting in the space between first and second sleep.